Bros and broettes, have you ever driven home in fall and you're like, what did I do wrong? One of the toughest times of year is this summer to fall, kind of early fall transition, dude. And I learned that the hard way. Can't tell you how many times I went home crying, dude, from Lake Guntersville, from some of these Alabama lakes. I struggled. Like, it's seasons, it's changes. It's not like Florida, right? I want to save you guys the headache. One of my favorite things to throw this time of year, and I kind of learned this, is a chatter donker, AKA a chatterbait, dude. However, there's a right way and there's a wrong way, and there's a few tweaks you need to make to your chatterbait presentation to make it work in fall, dude. It's very simple once you know them, but if you're not doing them, you're not catching fish. So hit that like and subscribe button. If you don't want to have the headaches and the crying that Mike went through for his first fall transitions, you're gonna want to watch this, dude. I swear to you, I wish I knew some of this stuff when I got to Alabama, dude. And some of it's really simple, but it just took me a while to learn. And I find with fall fishing, you're either on them or you're blank, dude. It's very kind of hero or zero deal. And there's real simple things you can do to change that. And all has to do with this seasonal transition. So first thing, right? You know, we're transitioning to fall, the focus becomes forage, right? Pelagic forage, shad, minnows, things that are roaming around. Fish are still related to structure to an extent, but it's really about that bait. So the very first thing and the simplest thing you can do to up your chatterbait game is just throw a light colored chatterbait, dude. Something like white chartreuse, you know, a shad style, Tennessee shad, Alabama shad, Guntersville shad, you know, simple kind of like colors, light colors, dude, that represent that forage. The exception, because there's an exception to every rule, and somebody's gonna get in the comments and throw a fit. If you have a lake where the forage or the bait is really kind of that crayfish, dude, there's a bunch of rocks, maybe you got a bunch of smallmouth, they're really focused on that, and you don't have the shad population or the minnow population or maybe like whitefish population that some of those other lakes have, that's when you might need to go to like a red or a brown or a dark colored kind of chatterbait. But I'll tell you a little like sneak. So a lot of times in that, especially that early fall period, these crayfish, they molt and they actually turn white. So like the crayfish are actually kind of like white with like a little blue or maybe green in them. So they actually look like that white or light colored chatterbait. So you can still throw that. Little sneaky tip, probably shouldn't have said that. If you're gonna change to a lighter colored chatterbait, you need to change to a lighter trailer, but there's a few other tweaks when it comes to that. I like kind of doing like a light, you know, maybe like a pearl and a green. That's a little spunk shad right there. I got some kind of crazy baits. You guys like these. Sometimes you go with something that looks a little more like smelty kind of thing like that. That's that Pro Point fishing lures. These, I showed you these are super cool. They're very unique chatterbait trailers. Once again, all like minnow trailers. These aren't like flappy doodle kind of like crayfish kind of kicking trailers. They don't look like brim, they don't look like bluegill. The other thing is size of that trailer. You really want to match the forage, and for the most part you're gonna find that the bait is small in fall. Like it really is like a bunch of little kind of minnow shads kind of swimming around, and you just have to downsize. These fish get very weird to sort of like middle-sized baits. You're almost better either going to one end of the spectrum and throwing like a giant trailer on there, or the other end of the spectrum and throwing an absolutely tiny mini trailer on there. I don't know why that is, because some of the bait is bigger, some of it's smaller, but I've had a lot more success downsizing those trailers. And when I say downsizing, I even mean taking like a jackhammer and putting, that's like that little 3 1/4, 3.5 inch spunk shad. I'll even take like that Gambler Komodo Jr., these Pro Points in a 3.25, just a super tiny minnow. I'll run the net bait, little kind of, actually it's that forward facing Hextech minnow. It's like 2.75 inches. I'll put that on my Chatterbait Mini. Downsizing is key. You still get bigger bites, you get numbers of bites especially, but downsizing and creating that compact package, even if you're using a standard size chatterbait, is key. Now, when do you use the Chatterbait Mini versus like a jackhammer versus like a standard blade chatterbait? If you have slightly stained water, or if you're fishing the bait slightly slower. One thing that the jackhammer does, and even like the Evo tungsten, is when you do reel it, when you're power reeling it, like really burning it, you get a lot of hunt. Like it almost gets all over the place and washes out to an extent. I don't want it to do that. I really look at the jackhammer as a perfect like steady retrieve with a couple fast reels from time to time. That's the perfect situation for that jackhammer. However, if I want to burn a bait, that's when I go to this guy, dude. The Chatterbait Mini in a 1/2 ounce is an absolute killer. It almost, I think I've talked about this, it almost fishes like a trap. You can really fry that thing, dude. Like you can really burn it. And in a lot of situations with these fish kind of chasing bait, they'll get into schooling situations and things where they're blasting bait, they're jumping up. You really can't fish a bait fast enough at that point. And that kind of leads into the next key. So one of the biggest keys and one of the biggest principles you need to focus on is where your bait is at in the water column. And this was one of the hardest things for me to understand. And it's a lot like minnow fishing. We've learned so much from like Active Target 2 forward-facing sonar that these fish really like a bait above their head. And if there's one season when that is probably one of the most important aspects of your retrieve, it's fall, dude. You need to have that bait running above those fish. And that can be like crazy in some situations. You can be fishing 10 feet of water, right? Maybe there's a little grass on the bottom, maybe there's some gravel, but like the fish are up, they're 2 foot under the surface, 1 foot under the surface. So you're burning that chatterbait in like a foot, 6 inches, maybe 2 feet. You're keeping it way up in the water column because those fish are so high, they're so suspended because they're chasing and corralling that bait. So it's hugely important to kind of understand where these fish are situated, whether you're doing that with forward-facing sonar or you're doing that just with your graphs. Figure out where that bait's at. That's one of the keys one of the old timers always told me, is when you're scanning around, when you're idling out of that boat ramp, dude, and you're looking around, look at your graph. You're not looking for bass, dude. You're looking for the bait balls. Where are the bait balls at on your graph? Are they 4 foot down? Are they 3 foot down? Are they 5 feet down? Are they 10 foot down? That's where you need to kind of focus and understand that your bait needs to ride above that column. That's really the key for your presentation. So the last thing I'm going to show you is kind of fun. So, I try to show you guys techniques that can, win tournaments, play a role in that, but also things that are kind of like a challenge. They're kind of just fun fishing, like go out and try it, catch a bunch of fish and enjoy yourself. So I got to thank my boys at Talk and Tackle for this. This is the Dara Break. It's by Jackal. This is basically a super micro chatterbait, and Z-Man does one too. They have the chatterbait mini in a 1/4 ounce, and then they actually have the micro chatterbait. So basically mini chatterbaits, double mini, right? And you can throw them on kind of like a medium action, like, I don't know, bait casting kind of setup. You can throw them on a spinning rod, like a medium to medium heavy, like 7-foot spinning rod. You can also throw them on the BFS stuff. And these baits, they're not the greatest to cast. They're very small presentations, but if you're on fisheries where you're talking about like micro minnows, micro shad, those little kind of fingernail looking shad, ultra clear water conditions where these fish are very hard to get to bite, or if you're getting some of those super cold fall days, dude, that happen a little further up north, these baits can be key. They're hard to cast, they're very slow to fish, but they provide an extremely small presentation. We talk about power finesse a lot, right? And the chatterbait mini fits into that category. These micro style chatterbaits 100% fit into that category. They really kind of capitalize on a certain point in the season when these fish get extremely hard to catch, but you don't want to sit there and do like, the little micro hair jig stuff. You don't want to do the float and fly. You still want to throw like a moving kind of vibrating bait, but you need something that's extremely downsized and extremely finessed, but still kind of a moving reactive bait. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. A chatterbait's an absolute tool, but if you're not making a few changes to how you're presenting it when you hit this fall transition, early fall into mid into late fall, you're not gonna be getting bit. And I suffered through that the first few years on Gunnersville because I didn't make those changes, dude. But if you guys got any tips for fall fishing, especially with a chatterbait, drop them down in the comments box. I always like getting your feedback. You guys actually got me out of a hole those first few seasons when I was struggling, so I highly appreciate it. I'll put links to all these baits that we talked about down in the description box at Tackle Warehouse and Monster Bass for you guys to check out. But if you're not out, dude, the weather is cool, the fish are biting. It's a great time of year to be out. A lot of guys are hunting and doing their thing, dude. You kind of have the lake to yourself. Go enjoy yourself, enjoy nature, enjoy being outdoors and floating around and catching some bass, my homies.